has been about 30 plus years that I've wanted to meet this amazing couple. And when you hear the story of how they have lived their lives, and I'm going to let them tell it, but I can't tell you how pumped I am that on our 25th anniversary of our club, that our female athletes in the club are going to hear how the Hawaii Ironman and endurance sport in a significant way have been influenced by women from day one. How a family, just a unique family of four, have lived a lifestyle that have changed the entire world. Maybe they didn't realize it when they were going down that pathway, but it certainly has. And how just their passion for fitness, something that we all do every week, a couple times a week, maybe 4 or 5 times if you're a more advanced athlete, how living your lifestyle doesn't have to be at odds with your passion. So first of all, I'd like to welcome from California, Judy and John Collins. So thank you so much for giving us some time in your busy schedules.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. It's very nice and warm here.
Yeah, well, that's okay. We've just come off our best 7 days in 100 years, so we're all feeling pretty warm right now, though winter is not too far away. Judy, you told me before we went live that if we hear the odd little airplane flying over your backyard, whereabouts are you at in the world? But I know there's an airplane landing strip not too far from your house.
Well, we are a couple of blocks from Naval Air Station, North Island. And when we walk about a mile to go swimming in the ocean, we are looking at Mexico.
Clearly, you know, when I look at the readings, your son and daughter were athletes. You had them involved in swimming and other activities. I'm reading about, 250-kilometer bike rides as a family and long hikes. So you were role models way back at a time that most families weren't necessarily active. Did you see yourself as pioneers, or was it just something that the two of you enjoyed doing?
We would not have called ourselves athletes in high school. Sports always took down my grade average. I avoided them whenever I could, except that I swam in the ocean, or what we called playing in the waves. I bicycled to get there, and I ran very, very hard to run home and back to school at lunchtime. That's what we did. So to me, triathlon has always been the activities of childhood that were so much fun in Hawaii and in California. I say that if our children had not become age group swimmers, we never, ever would have taken up regular exercise in our mid-30s. We felt completely detached from their 5-day-a-week schedule of swim practice and entering meets on the weekend. It never crossed our minds, yet John had commuted by bicycle almost from the time we were married.
During the 50s, I was on a nuclear submarine, and it takes a lot of laps around the engine room to make up a mile.
So, John, we're getting close now to 1974. Many people consider it to be the first triathlon ever, the San Diego Track Club, if I recall. Can you kind of tell us about that September event, how it happened? What's the background of why there's an actual triathlon in San Diego in 1974?
Well, I'm going to pass this one over because Judy actually knows the answers to it. My part of it is that Flo Squires, one of the women that she will mention, came to swim practice.
She was one of our master swimmers. Our group had been formed by a retired frogman who looked at the parents of the children's swim team and thought the parents looked soft. The children were athletes, their parents were soft. And he started an adult swim group. Flo Squires was one of those swimmers. Her children were on the swim team. And she decided she wanted to learn how to run so that she could qualify for the Boston Marathon. Notice that 2-step. I'm going to run so I can be in the Boston Marathon. No years of training. She just made that decision, and that's how we all did then. One night she invited us
Don't worry, I can hear you, so don't worry, we can hear you from this end.
You can hear?
Yeah.
It's hard for us to hear what we're saying when those planes go off. By the way, her husband was one of those aviators that make all the noise, like our daughter, who became an aviator. But she made an announcement before our swim practice, and we took her up on it, and we picked up our 2 children after their swim practice and went to that event. It had been for the prior 2 years a run swim that was organized by somebody named David Payne, who had been an advocate of a master's men's swim group, 40 and over. Before that, the runners had to swim open with all the college age people. So this was the birthday event that year because one of the track club members had a running injury and had started riding a bicycle and enjoyed it. So Don Shanahan and Jack Johnstone were told to combine their events. And then they researched the word and came up with triathlon. And I just realized in the last few days, I have 5 years of newsletters for the San Diego Track Club that Jack sent me before he died. And the run swim distances and course were about the same. So we started out with a 2.8 mile run, went back to our cars where our bicycles were scratching the car paint, got on our bikes and did 5.2 miles of a bike ride. And then we ran back over to this island, Fiesta Island in Mission Bay Park, took off our shorts and our shoes and our socks, threw them into a garbage bag, and did 4 or 5 run swim legs. We ended with a swim, and it was so much fun to end an event with a swim. I still feel that way. And that meant a little over 10 miles, and it took anywhere from about 50 minutes to 90 minutes. It ended in the dark because it happened to be on a Wednesday after work. And on our last swim leg, there was a bonfire on the beach where they took our time, thank goodness, because we had to find our way up a dirt bluff.
On the ship.
How important was the very first triathlon that you guys had eventually when you guys get to Hawaii? So at a certain point, you now are moving from San Diego, you get transferred, I think it's to Hawaii. Is that the next step for you guys from San Diego? What year do you move to Hawaii?
Well, we moved there in 1975, shortly after the first Coronado Optimist Club triathlon that was organized by our swim coach as a surprise to us. It was a bike run, swim run. And John and I, we all entered, but only our children did it. We decided to drive all night to San Francisco to do a swim in San Francisco Bay because we had read that they gave, get this, pewter mugs to all the participants. And it wasn't so.
But we still have the glass mugs they did give us.
They gave us glass mugs. So we called that the drive, swim, drive. Meanwhile, our children were in that first triathlon. And I had the reaction from the Mission Bay triathlon that it was so much fun. It was a lot more fun than swimming for over an hour. And I told our coach that, and he is the one, Stan Antrim, who came up with the idea of the triathlon in July 75, shortly before we moved to Hawaii.
So you get to Hawaii now with some skills of some swimming and a little bit of biking and running. Do you find that population when you get to Hawaii? Do you kind of immediately start to find other groups that are there, or are you all on your own as new people moving into Hawaii?
Actually, we thought we were on our own, and to the point where we actually started a master swimming group ourselves before we found out that there already was one, the Waikiki Swim Club. And
We hired the children's swim coach to start a master's team. And one of the people who signed up said, I don't want to come on Saturday. Don't you know that all the swimmers on the island swim a 1K and 2K course at Ala Moana Lagoon in Honolulu? And that was that. We stopped having our master's group, started showing up on Saturday. And then in order to get access to a swimming pool, one of the swimmers suggested that we contact the Red Cross, all of us become lifeguards, so that we would always have a lifeguard in the off hours at a swim pool. That was just the only rule. And we ended up going on to a swim calendar that became our social life, the marathon Bennett.
So we're now talking 75, in that kind of window, 75. You guys are doing some of the rough water swims. John is in the Navy in the region. The family's growing, they're athletic, and the kids are swimming and taking part in sport. How do you start to formulate this Ironman idea? Where does it come from? You know, are you sitting at the kitchen table? There's all kinds of myths. Where did this come from, the start of the idea?
Well, right.
That whole thing was Judy's idea, and I didn't know much about it at all. I was in the Navy, and if you've heard of these jobs that are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this was that plus a little extra time if you could work with both hands. So I had really no idea what she was doing, and she was trying to put together a triathlon in Hawaii, a distance kind of triathlon. And I wasn't. I just entered, paid money, showed up, and did things. So that was sort of the extent of my part of it. But she was always adding up this course and that course, and how could we tie that together? And
John and I, in our minds, say that the longest running triathlon in the world, the Coronado Optimist Triathlon, since 1975, has that the idea for that was because we went back and told our swim coach why we had missed practice. And we said, this is so much fun. He said, it's not a sport. I remember that. I had been laying out triathlon courses in Coronado, San Diego, Honolulu from 1974 on because it was just so much fun to combine geography with things you like to do.
So we're now getting closer to that very first race. Tell us, how far out before did you formulate that this is actually going to occur from this knowledge you've had way back in 75? You're now living in Hawaii. When do you now start to formalize this a little bit more, Judy, in terms that there's going to be an actual event?
1 year before. So I decided that if we put on a long distance triathlon, we would satisfy our desire to do long distance events and also introduce triathlon to Hawaii and also get off the volunteer hook for all four in the family. So at any rate, February 77, we were in charge of the run swim. It was 2 weeks away, and I decided we would put on a long distance triathlon a year from then in February 1978. We made the decision in probably a total of 10 or 12 minutes.
So you now have 12 months to get ready for this event. Do you put the word out? Do you have any kind of a working, committee? Is there any budget? Is it all happening at your kitchen table at nighttime after swim practice?
No, no, no. We didn't even talk about it until October 1977. I mean, small talk at breakfast after the swim on Saturday. But no, it was all planned because you see, it was based on 3 events that already existed. We had the rules, the permits were in place, but we're formalizing it. Most were show and go, low cost, no t-shirt. For some events, we didn't even start a watch or keep a time. And that was one of the events. I find this interesting. On the West Coast newsletter, we knew at the time there were events that sometimes were called challenge events. They might keep a time of the first finisher, but they would not give that finisher a name because the goal was to complete the event. And it happens that I looked up the other day on the 1979 West Coast Swim newsletter, and I saw that it was on the Columbia River, and 4 in our family did that event last year. It was the same event. And John said a young man finished first, and they had his time, and all the other couple of hundred people just finished. It was a challenge event. And that was our model for this Around the Island triathlon. Until we found out that the Waikiki Swim Club had no event insurance, that the AAU, which sanctioned the Honolulu Marathon and the Waikiki Rough Water, certainly would not be interested in our adding a bike leg. And so we decided it wouldn't be a club event open to the public. It would be a public event for which we would get some permission.
So in my reading, I see that those initial 15 people essentially were all, if I'm not mistaken, kind of members of that race so that nobody could sue each other, that you guys were all kind of covered in that way, that you were a racer and a organizer of the event at the same time. So there was nobody to kind of look to and point a finger for suing. Is that correct in that first year?
That was the goal. I wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a lawyer. We didn't have any money. We had a little house and a car. That was about it. And we were really, really scared of lawyers.
I got it. So I see a piece of paper that has some rules written. Whose handwriting was that? Who wrote out those rules? And I'm assuming that those 15 people all kind of got this handwritten set of this is the Hawaii Ironman rules leading into the event in 1978.
And they built on the rules for those other events.
And I put that together at work with the help of my secretary. We didn't use any government time. She did it on her lunch hour. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So it's coming up onto race week. I see these fantastic little Ironman plaques that people got, awards. Where did they come from? Whose idea was that? And I'm sure that those things, that was a dozen or so that made it into people's hands, are now historic benefits that you want to keep in your house.
I guess that was actually my second try. The first one was trying to weld up out of bolts something that looked like the 10-man boat that you see on the logo of the T-shirts. And it turns out that I was not that good a welder, so I decided to solder it up out of copper, the copper pipe with a steel head. And I'm not that good a solderer either. Judy's version of this that I have, the head is not there. And when Johnny Carson invited Tom Warren after 79 to come and be on the television show, Tom took his trophy, and there on national television, the head fell right off.
So we're leading into race week. John, you're doing the event. Did your son do that first race as well?
No, and that's one of my lifetime regrets. He really wanted to be a late start. He had to be on a relay at a championship swim meet. John's going to get one of the trophies.
Things rolling as we get into race week in 1978. It's
Well,
the original race, and if I understand, you had to have some of your own support out on the course. Roads weren't closed down, so this is a lot of rules that people have to figure out and follow on their own.
we followed the model of the around the island perimeter relays, which had 2 cars that leapfrogged around the island to change off the runners. And those cars had all the sustenance. They were the aid station for that particular runner. We followed that model for the Ironman, but with just 1 car. And we also required a paddler in the ocean.
No cutoff times in those early years. The concept, as you talked about very early on, was completion. Get through this, use whatever it took. The 12, there we go. So you're at the finishing line. How amazing is it to have one of those put into your hands? Were they at the finishing line waiting for you, or did you get it the next day when you woke up?
Actually, it was the next day, but I was still soldering on these things the day before the race.
Our daughter was helping him do it.
Anyway, the workmanship was not all that great, as I said. These I made in 1970 or
2003.
in 2003 when Bob Babbitt
And Rick Kozlowski
put on what they call Hawaiian Ironman Revisited around Oahu instead of the Big Island. And here's the nut and there's the head. I couldn't find the T-shirt.
Right.
So we're going to move ahead. So the race ends. The dozen people finish. It's late into the night. We have this 11:46 time by Gordon Holler as he runs down John Dunbar. What happens after that race? Do you go into kind of like just back to work mode and forget about this for the next 8 or 9 months, or do you start immediately thinking about the next season, 1979?
Well, it depends on who you were. If you were Gordon Howler or John Dunbar or one of those people, I think they went down and had a party. In my case, I had a really difficult time staying awake for more than 30 minutes and a really difficult time staying asleep for more than 30 minutes for the entire day. But we met at our house the next day for the presentation of the T-shirts and the trophies. And the T-shirts, this is the 1979 T-shirt right here. But in 1978, it was my arm. Oh, okay. In 1978, you brought your own T-shirt to our house, or your beach towel, or underwear, or whatever you wanted. And I had made a silk screen for the top part, which had the logo on it. And we put that on anything you want, as many as you wanted, any color you wanted, as long as it was black ink. And then the day after the event, you brought it back, and I had a separate silk screen.
No, this is key. The wet, smelly shirts stayed in our house for the next couple of days, hanging off the curtain rod in our dining room. Very strong odor. And then the day after the triathlon, people were invited late in the day to come by, and John and I had put finisher on the shirts of the 12 people who had finished. And at that time, John gave them a trophy. There was no party, it was a pickup.
So I have a question. We're getting close to the 79 race, the second year, and I understand you learning how to deal with stress as a race director. The weather's not cooperating. You've got to make some tough decisions. How did that whole thing, because we're now the second year on this race. We've got another dozen people getting ready to do this event. It's had a year history, and now the islands are speaking to you.
Well,
first of all, there were a lot more people interested the second year than there had been the first year.
And the first year it had been mid-February, and we followed the rules. Believe me, we didn't spend much time being on race preparation because there wasn't much to do. We were putting a triathlon together out of 3 annual events, you see, that we and the others did. So there wasn't much of a learning curve. However, we were told by the Honolulu Marathon that no one should put on a long distance event within 4 weeks of the marathon. And thereafter, until the beginning of the sports season in March, that's how we were supposed to do it, 4 weeks apart. The Oahu Perimeter Relay had dibs on mid-January. And the year that we came up with the idea, the weather had been so awful that they had to put it off until February. And that was the night we came up with our idea. We never paid attention to the weather and why the calendar was blank. It turns out the 1 month you should never have an outdoor event like that is January. The second worst month is February. But they were the only dates open on the calendar, and we were the new kids on the block with a new event, so we didn't have a choice. That's how it happened.
You now have to make some tough decisions. You've got the athletes. The race is supposed to start. I understand you've got to, first of all, delay the race, and then you've got to go do some begging for some lifeguards and support, or else this event may not get off the ground.
She had to go get the boat. First of all, the first day we canceled it because the wind was blowing so badly that the paddlers would not have been able to stay with the swimmers.
But it also happens that we were awakened the second year by a phone call that said the power boat of a swimmer that was coming from around the island to monitor the course and carry the lifeguards, he couldn't get out of port. The sailboat that was going to mark the second channel on the Waikiki Rough Water Swim couldn't get his boat out of port. That meant we would have to cancel because we would be violating the Coast Guard Marine Parade permit that said we would protect our swimmers. One of the 1978 finishers, Ian Emerson, came running up to me and he said, "Judy, go down to the Outrigger Canoe Club. They have a launch that goes out when the canoes go out. Maybe you can get them to let us use their boat." And all I could think of was, and who's going to drive the boat? Now, I was a swim director, lifeguard with another friend in the Waikiki Swim Club. So I went racing down, found out that the launch driver was there. And because of the weather, there were no members of the Outrigger Canoe Club there. And he was willing to take his boat out and carry us so we could be lifeguards. Before I told John about it, I went to the phone on the wall, no cell phones. I called Michael and I said, "Michael, if you can find some way to get down here, we're going to change the start time to 8 o'clock so you can get here." And then I ran back to John and said, "John, the race is on, we have a boat." And then I climbed into the boat and the other lifeguard, and we went out beyond the reef to await the start at 8.
Power of women, once again, Judy, in this theme of the story, and John certainly helped me in the priming for this. I mean, you can just see how critical, dating back to your very first support from, Flo Squires to your and John's combined, but obviously John has shown us how critical you have been in that process. And obviously 1979 doesn't happen unless you go down and twist some arms and then have the courage to get out into that boat so these swimmers can get their 2.4-mile swim in.
Well, I hadn't realized that until recently. And I want you to know that I had started out with realizing that every time I thought about triathlon, I thought of 8 women. And one of them is Paula Newby-Fraser, who famously has said, the Queen of Kona, the only athlete to have won that championship 7 times, she has a line, "Ironman triathlon is very doable if you put in the time And you know that from the stories you've told.
Help us understand now that the transition to you guys are now leaving. You've put on two of the most amazing races without a lot of resources, and now you guys have a box of goodies that you need to somehow get rid of because you're leaving Hawaii. Talk about the truths, breaking down the myths of how that got transferred over, how you finally found the next race director.
But John asked all the official agencies. You even asked Nautilus International, right?
Yeah, later.
Right, later. We asked everybody, and we had planned to put it on and be in it every year. Oh, that's funny. I just want to show you what John just did with my head.
With the head tucked underneath the arm.
That's right. Sounds like a Monty Python thing. Well, we asked everybody, and strangely enough, the answer was this. I intend to do it next year. I don't want to put it on. So all the people who were such great fans of the Ironman, and I can't wait to do this next year, said no, they wanted to be in it. They didn't want to put it on. And so we had decided we had to cancel it. And it was going to be the next night at the Waikiki Swim Club swim banquet. We were in charge of it that year. And our movers were coming the next day, and all the triathlon stuff would be packed up.
And ABC Wide World of Sports had called with a telephone, no pieces of paper, unofficially, I guess, and said, we're going to be out there for the
Hula Bowl.
If we leave some of our equipment there, can we come back and film it or tape it?
And the Hula Bowl was in late December or early January, and this Ironman was going to be on January 12th. And we discussed it and said, it's all right if ABC comes to film as long as they find their way around themselves. We cannot greet them or provide any guidance about the course because we were down to 3 or 4 people to be volunteers because people were doing it instead of volunteering. The incoming president of the swim club said, so many of our swimmers want to do the Ironman, you can't cancel it. And we said, well, one person said he wasn't going to do it because he didn't have the help. So Karen Vanderbush said, I'll get every bit of help that they need for the support vehicles in 1980. Anything they want if you'll just put it on. So it was the Waikiki Swim Club volunteers who had said they would help. However, John didn't know this. And bless his heart, he said to me the night before the movers, what can I do to help? And I said, get rid of the triathlon. Go ask Hank at the fitness club again. Hank had been the sponsor of Gordon Haller, who won the 1978 triathlon. And John went down, Hank said yes, and John told, I said, tell him about these dozens of volunteers who are ready to help. And John went down and talked to Hank, and this time Hank said yes. That's why I consider him to be a key man in the history of triathlon.
Amazing when you realize, do you now see the dots? You talked about Sydney and the Olympic Games. I was there. One of our athletes, Simon Whitfield, from this club, actually won the gold medal. Do you get the sense that what you did in the 70s, allowed the Olympics eventually to come, emerge out of what happened? I mean, I can tell you, if we had much longer time over a beer in the future, a Canadian named Les McDonald, who did that race 5 times in a row, set up the start of the ITU literally from the Hawaii Ironman parking lot where they were having post-race beers after the events would happen. And that 1989 meeting in France grew out of, people, the one place in the world that the triathlon brainstem came together was in Hawaii every year. And Les's growth of the ITU, the Olympics, and everything that we see around the world in 120 countries really grew out of what you created, what Valerie kept going, and obviously what Dr. Jim and others contributed to over the years. But incredible, and Les McDonald's story is very similar to yours. On his kitchen table in North Vancouver, not making any money out of the sport. Is it ironic that maybe the two families that have contributed the most to the history of triathlon, your family and Les McDonald's family, both did it purely out of a love of the sport, contribution to sport, and never made any of the money. When you hear of selling for $650 million and any of these numbers, does any of that cause you any pain, or you just say, what, we did our part, there's no animosity, we're happy that the sport is growing?
This whole saga is just a series of dots and links in the chain. Any one of those broken, the whole thing would have stopped. And the commercial success was due to the success of people that did commercial things. We didn't. Like I said, we lost $25 the first year. Similarly, we made it up the second year, so we can claim to be the first race director ever to break even in 2 years.
We never did break.
Who comes up with the saying, swim 2.4 miles, bike 112 miles, run 26 miles, and brag for the rest of your life? Where did that come from?
Well, that's what I said to her on the night that we came up with it. It was just a description of what the events were. The brag for the rest of your life was a family and group joke. It was the wife of a running friend who got tired of listening to her husband run a 3-hour marathon and then have a 5-hour explanation of it.
Our long-term goal in Hawaii each year was that it would happen the next year. And we had no idea that it would keep on happening like this.
Well, it's ironic we're talking to you on the only year that the Hawaii Ironman will not have occurred in the entire 40-plus year history. So we plan to be back there next year. I certainly have my airline ticket already booked. And on behalf of all who do the sport and the C3 Canadian Cross Training Club on our 25th anniversary, we thank you immensely for your time today.
Well, congratulations on the 25th. That's wonderful.
Thank you very much, guys. You have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the chance to talk to you.